Well, this coming week, Gardaí are due to brief members of the Oireachtas on personal safety. This comes in the wake of the killing of British MP David Amess and against a background of increased protests at the homes of politicians here. I've been speaking to TDs about their personal security.
How are you, Carol?
How are you doing?
We're here at the office waiting on me as usual.
Yes, this is your constituency
It's the
office.
constituency office, as you say. There's no sign on the door, but we have signs upstairs.
And do you have cameras outside here, you do?
I have a camera looking down at the door.
When did you put that in?
We put that in when we moved here from our last constituency office, because the last constituency office there had been a petrol bomb attack on the hallway.
Sinn Féin TD Angus O'Snothy describing the event that caused him to beef up security at his Dublin South Central constituency office.
And somebody literally threw a petrol bomb into the stairwell, and the smoke kind of billowed up the stairs. Those who were upstairs, including the person who was working for me at the time, Claire, panicked, and they eventually managed to open the fire door upstairs and escape out onto a roof.
Most TDs and senators have constituency offices, and O'Snothy says this should not change.
It's a good part. It keeps you grounded, and I think it should continue. But I think we can do that with a little bit more security, a little bit more protection, and a bit more awareness maybe from ourselves.
It starts off with the social media attacks and the verbal attacks on social media, and then it escalates to outside your office. And look, I've had it. I can absolutely, I'm the living person who went through this for a long number of years.
Wexford TD and former Defence Minister Paul Keogh says he has endured protests outside his office, his home, and has had abuse hurled at him in public.
And probably when it crossed the boundary was when I had 4 protests outside of my own family home. And I have kids all under the age of 10 at the time, and old enough to understand that there was something going on. It definitely had a very lasting effect on one of my kids, who was the oldest and who was more understanding of what these people were doing there.
Keogh says some politicians don't hold public clinics unless they have somebody there with them.
But most of these TDs, their offices are, and they're readily available, walk-in clinics off the street, where in the UK you have to make an appointment, where this guy that killed Sir David Amess made an appointment with Sir David and went in and killed him, stabbed him. Where in Ireland you don't do that. You can come in off the street. You don't make an appointment, and your local TD, who could be a minister of state, could be a senator, is in behind his desk, his or her desk, waiting on that constituent to come through, and nobody knows what threat can come through that door.
What you want to see is armed security for ministers and ministers of state.
Well, what I'm looking for is a review, and it is up then to An Garda Síochána, along with the government, to look at the threat that is there. And I personally believe that there is a real threat there.
Ivana Bacik, can you tell me, have you ever faced any kind of threat to yourself that you would have considered a security threat?
Well, yes, I have. I've been subjected to many of those sort of incidents, being shouted at, being threatened and so on over the years. I suppose I'm in politics and have been an activist for a long time, and certainly I recall when I was first involved in even in the student movement in the late 80s, some very nasty abusive behaviour towards any of us who were identified as being pro-choice or with the student movement on those campaigns around Repeal the Eighth. And I think that unfortunately hasn't changed, and I suppose as we've seen with social media, the discourse has got more toxic, and unfortunately it can be quite nasty at times.
Labour TD Ivana Bacik wants to remain accessible to constituents, but she welcomes Garda advice.
What would be useful would be, a reassurance that the Gardaí are very aware of the issues, and that there is a clear line of reporting within the Gardaí, that we know who to talk to about things like threats and abusive behaviour.
But why are politicians receiving more threats and protests?
Well, there's the mix of reasons. So some is that people are winding themselves up by kind of feeding off some of the materials that's online, that everybody is wrong and bar them. But there are also, and I think this is key, is there's a lot of people out there who are hurting financially, and that and kind of they're getting angrier, and it's just build up of frustration, and they're just lashing out.
It's unfortunate. I think what's happened with social media has been a sort of an increased sense of invulnerability, or a sense that because people can post messages and comments anonymously, that they can therefore do so at a much more nasty level. So I think that has contributed to this increase in behaviour, but it's really behaviour that it has to be condemned.
Would you think legislation would help with that, to ban protests in front of a politician's home or near it?
I think we need to look at options around how we ensure that peaceful protest is not curtailed, but that people's rights to privacy, particularly the rights of the families of those in public life, are protected. So I think we will have to look at how we balance those, and I'd certainly be open to looking at legislation on that.
And that was Labour TD Ivana Bacik speaking to me there.